Imagine uncovering a story that turns everything you thought you knew upside down. In the early days of Christianity, when the faith was just beginning to take shape, some believed something unimaginable. Jesus was never crucified. While most of us think of the crucifixion as one of the most important parts of Jesus' story, some of his early followers didn't believe it happened. This isn't just a rumor or a myth. It's something we know from a man named Ignatius, one of the first leaders of the Christian church. Ignatius lived at a time when people still remembered Jesus and his disciples, and he wrote about these Christians who denied the crucifixion. He held the position of a bishop, serving as a type of leader within the early church. He was brave and passionate, even when things got dangerous. In fact, he was aware of his impending death. Lions were sending him to Rome to perish for his faith. But on his way, he wrote letters to other Christians to encourage them to stay strong in their beliefs. These Christians held beliefs that diverged significantly from those held by the majority of people today. They believed that Jesus didn't really die on the cross. Instead, they believed that his crucifixion was merely a facade, and God intervened to save him in the nick of time. Ignatius strongly disagreed with them, calling their belief wrong and dangerous, but the fact that he had to write about it shows us that this idea was a big deal back then. Why would some Christians believe this? We may never know for sure, but this belief didn't just disappear. It shows up again, hundreds of years later, in the holy book of Islam, the Quran. The Quran, written in the 7th century, also says that Jesus was not crucified. Instead, the Quran teaches that God saved Jesus and created the appearance of his crucifixion. Muslims hold this belief in high regard, and their holy book explicitly affirms it. Ignatius was not only challenging the notion that Jesus did not undergo a crucifixion, he was also trying to create a new identity for Christians, one that was very different from Judaism. This was a significant shift, as Jesus himself was of Jewish descent. He followed Jewish laws, celebrated Jewish holidays, and taught others to do the same. After Jesus' time, many of his followers, including his brother James, continued to live as Jews while also believing in him. However, he found this to be incongruous. He said Christians should stop following Jewish traditions and create a separate faith. For Ignatius, Christianity wasn't just a part of Judaism, it was something new. This decision to break away from Judaism created a huge change in history. It's also kind of ironic. The religion of Jesus ended up rejecting many of the practices that Jesus himself followed. At first, Christianity was a mix of beliefs and debates. Some people believed Jesus was crucified, others didn't. Some followed Jewish traditions, others wanted to leave them behind. Over time, the loudest voices, like Ignatius, won out. However, the more subdued voices, such as the Christians who refuted the crucifixion, left enduring traces of their beliefs. Let's rewind history to the time of Jesus, a man who lived as a devout Jew. He followed the Torah, taught Jewish customs, and spoke to his followers about obeying the laws given by Moses. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus even said, "Do not think I have come to abolish the law until heaven and earth pass away. Not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law." For Jesus, the Jewish faith was central to his life and teachings. The religion that grew from his life, Christianity, would eventually turn away from those very roots. Judaism played a significant role in the earliest followers of Jesus, including his brother James. James led the church in Jerusalem, and according to historical sources like the Bible and Jewish historian Josephus, he was famous for being zealous in following Jewish laws. Even years after Jesus' death, the early church continued to revolve around Jewish traditions. For example, Acts 21 describes a moment when Paul, one of the most influential figures in Christianity, visited James in Jerusalem. James and the other elders of the church proudly told Paul about the thousands of Jewish believers who had joined their movement, believers who were zealous for the law. These early Christians weren't abandoning their Jewish faith, they were embracing it as part of their belief in Jesus as the Messiah. This is where Ignatius of Antioch enters the story. Born in the early 30s AD, Ignatius was a bishop who lived at a critical moment in Christianity's history. By his time, the church was expanding rapidly, moving out of its Jewish foundation and becoming a global movement. Ignatius believed that for Christianity to grow, it needed to cut ties with Judaism. In one of his most famous letters, written around 110 AD, Ignatius declared that continuing to follow Jewish customs while professing faith in Jesus was an absurdity. He emphasized that Christianity was something new, something distinct. "The Christian faith does not look to Judaism," he wrote, "but Judaism looks to Christianity." For Ignatius, the faith needed to stand alone, separate from the traditions that had shaped its beginnings. This was a bold move, and it marked a turning point in religious history. After its Jewish origins, Christianity was establishing its own identity. It was no longer just a sect within Judaism. It was becoming something entirely different. Here's where the story takes an ironic twist. The religion of Jesus, the man who followed Jewish laws and traditions, evolved into a faith that rejected those very practices. Ignatius, a leader of the early church, was actively pushing Christians away from the religion that Jesus himself practiced. Even more ironic is the fact that Jesus, according to the Gospels, told his disciples to obey Jewish laws. In Matthew 23, for example, Jesus said to listen to those who sit on Moses' seat, meaning the teachers of Jewish law, and to do everything they instructed. Yet Ignatius and the emerging Christian movement chose a different path, one that distanced itself from the Torah and Jewish traditions. This decision wasn't just theological, it was practical. Christianity was growing rapidly among Gentiles, and asking them to adopt Jewish customs, like dietary laws and circumcision, could have slowed that growth. But in making this shift, the church was also breaking away from the very foundations that Jesus himself had upheld. Islam maintains that God sent Jesus, known as Isa in the Quran, as a prophet. However, in contrast to traditional Christian belief, the Quran explicitly asserts that Jesus did not undergo crucifixion. Instead, it teaches that God saved him, and what appeared to be his death on the cross was a divine illusion. Islamic teachings about Jesus centrally view this idea as a testament to God's power and mercy. Ignatius of Antioch wrote about Christians in the first century who denied the crucifixion. They held the belief that God miraculously spared Jesus. Despite Ignatius's condemnation of this belief, its existence demonstrates that the notion of Jesus' salvation from the cross is not exclusive to Islam. It was already prevalent in the early days of Christianity. To better understand this connection, let's look at how Islam views Jesus. While Christians see him as the Son of God and the central figure of salvation, Muslims honor him as a prophet, second only to Muhammad. In Islamic tradition, Jesus performed miracles, spread God's message, and will return at the end of time to restore justice. However, the Quran firmly rejects the Christian understanding of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. Instead, it describes how God saved Jesus from his enemies, an act of divine intervention that emphasizes God's sovereignty. This belief isn't just theological, it reflects a broader perspective in Islam that focuses on God's absolute control over events. Christianity, on the other hand, views the crucifixion as essential, a moment of ultimate sacrifice that redeems humanity. This difference highlights one of the key theological divides between the two faiths, but it also points to their shared fascination with Jesus' life and role in history. The story of Jesus' crucifixion is central to Christian faith, symbolizing ultimate sacrifice and divine redemption. However, not everyone subscribes to the traditional narrative of Jesus' death on the cross and subsequent resurrection. One alternative explanation, known as the swoon theory, proposes that Jesus did not die during the crucifixion, but instead fainted from exhaustion and later revived in the tomb. The swoon theory is particularly significant in discussions about the historical and theological debates surrounding Jesus' final moments. It aligns with questions raised by some early Christians and Islamic teachings, both of which suggest that Jesus did not actually die on the cross. While it doesn't share the divine intervention view of Islam, the swoon theory adds another layer to the mystery of what really happened. At its core, the swoon theory suggests that Jesus survived the crucifixion. This theory suggests that Jesus, experiencing the intense physical trauma of nailing to a cross, fainted or fell into a deep unconscious state due to blood loss, exhaustion, and shock. The Roman soldiers mistakenly believed he was dead and removed him from the cross. The cool environment in the tomb, along with the care of individuals like Joseph of Arimathea, revived him after his placement. Then Jesus emerged from the tomb, leading his disciples to mistake his appearances for a resurrection. This explanation, which attempts to provide a naturalistic alternative to the miraculous resurrection described in the Gospels, first gained attention among European scholars in the 18th and 19th centuries. Philosophers such as Carl Friedrich Barth and Heinrich Paulus proposed that mistaken death rather than divine intervention could explain the resurrection story. Most historians and theologians reject the swoon theory, despite its intrigue and widespread criticism. Several arguments challenge its plausibility. The crucifixion was a brutal and precise method of execution perfected by the Romans to ensure death. The crucifixion involved severe flogging, nailing to a wooden cross, and prolonged physical agony that led to suffocation or heart failure. Roman soldiers received training to verify death before removing a body from the cross. Medical experts interpret the outflow of blood and water as a sign of death, as the Gospels describe a soldier piercing Jesus' side with a spear. The trauma of crucifixion causes irreversible damage to the body, including organ failure. Even in a fainted state, the likelihood of surviving such an ordeal is considered high. The theory assumes that Jesus, after enduring such extreme physical suffering, could recover within a few days, move the heavy stone blocking the tomb, and appear to his followers as healthy and whole. This strains credibility for most scholars. The scholarly consensus that the Roman governor Pontius Pilate ordered the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth is based on archaeological evidence and written records from antiquity. While contemporary researchers continue to delve into the cultural and political context surrounding this event, no significant archaeological discovery has emerged to overturn the widely accepted view of Jesus' execution by crucifixion. Archaeological findings, such as the remains of a man named Yehohanan, discovered near Jerusalem in 1968, reveal the brutal reality of this practice. Yehohanan's remains, with a nail driven through the heel bone, provide physical evidence of crucifixion methods used during the 1st century. Such findings help historians understand the physical suffering endured by victims of this punishment and confirm its widespread use during the Roman occupation of Judea. Modern archaeological research has primarily focused on providing more context rather than challenging the narrative of Jesus' crucifixion. Scholars have studied burial customs, the role of tombs in 1st century Judea, and the logistics of Roman executions. For example, studies of tomb sites near Jerusalem align with gospel descriptions of Jesus' burial, further corroborating elements of the story. While new discoveries occasionally spark interest, none have called into question the overall scholarly agreement that Jesus was crucified. In his letter to the Smyrnians, Ignatius explicitly condemned those who claimed that Jesus' suffering and death were not real. He wrote, "He, Jesus, suffered all these things for our sakes, and he suffered truly, even as he also truly raised himself, not as certain unbelievers say, that he only seemed to suffer." In his letter to the Trallians, Ignatius reinforced this belief, stating, Be deaf, therefore, when anyone speaks to you apart from Jesus Christ, who was of the family of David, who was the son of Mary, who was truly born, who both ate and drank, who was truly persecuted under Pontius Pilate, who was truly crucified and died. Here Ignatius underscores the tangible reality of Jesus' life and death. By highlighting the crucifixion's historicity, he sought to counter early heresies that diminished the physical and sacrificial nature of Jesus' death. Through these writings, Ignatius passionately argued for the centrality of the crucifixion in Christian theology. He saw it as the cornerstone of the faith, affirming both the humanity and divinity of Christ. His letters reflect the urgent need to preserve this belief in the face of theological challenges during the formative years of Christianity. If you're enjoying this journey of discovery and would like to support more content like this, please click on the Super Thanks button. Your contribution keeps these stories alive, growing this community and fueling thought-provoking discussions. As we reflect on the crucifixion of Jesus, we find ourselves standing at the intersection of history and belief, where the past informs the present and mystery fuels faith. The story of the crucifixion is not just a tale of suffering and death, it is a narrative that has shaped the spiritual and cultural identity of billions of people across centuries. From the accounts of Ignatius of Antioch, who passionately defended the reality of Jesus' suffering, to the early Christians who questioned or reinterpreted its meaning, and the Quran's declaration of a divine intervention, each perspective adds a layer of complexity to this foundational event. These differing views highlight how the crucifixion, far from being a settled historical moment, continues to inspire debate, devotion, and discovery. The swoon theory, early Christian descent, and Islamic teachings challenge us to look deeper, to consider not only the historical facts, but also the interpretations that have emerged. Each theory and belief, whether accepted or rejected, reflects humanity's struggle to understand the divine and the extraordinary. History may offer facts, and faith may provide answers, but the crucifixion remains a symbol of unity and division, a moment where humanity and divinity intersect. By exploring its mysteries, we not only deepen our understanding of Jesus' life and legacy, but also find ourselves grappling with the profound questions of our own existence. Thanks for watching. Join our community by subscribing to this channel. See you in the next video.